please welcome the husband and wife team from the amazing Brown Sack Restaurant, Malaika and Adam.
Tonight we want to talk a little bit about food and family, and more importantly our grandmothers, since we've had some events in the last few years that have sort of made food and our families give us a little bit of perspective on why we've been in the restaurant industry now for about 20 years. We own a little sandwich shop in Logan Square called the Brown Sack, which Monty mentioned. Been there for about 6.5 years. And when Monty mentioned this event to us, we were really excited to do it, but a little bit scared to think about what are we going to talk about. And after thinking about it for a few weeks, or putting it off for a few weeks, it sort of hit me what I was going to talk about, and then it sort of related. We tried to figure something out together, and it was definitely about our grandmothers. So when I was a kid, I would go to a lake with my family and meet with my grandparents who were from a farm in Iowa, and my grandmother was a teacher at a one-room schoolhouse. She taught my mom, all her siblings, in a little one-room schoolhouse. And we would go to this lake in Iowa called Clear Lake, Iowa. If anybody's familiar with that, that's where Buddy Holly played his last concert before his plane crashed in the next town over, Mason City. That's where I spent all my childhoods through the 70s and early 80s. It was always the most special time of the summer because we were going there with all of our families. I'd see my cousins who were from Iowa. It was a totally different world from us coming from the suburbs of Chicago, going to be with our cousins who grew up on farms, and they fished and hunted, and they were sort of tough and rumble guys. And my grandfather was definitely a tough Iowa farmer. His name was Benny Bly Walker. Even when he had emphysema at 90, he had an old Milwaukee can, and he had a skull bandit in his cheek of his mouth, all the way till he passed away. He was not giving that up. But getting back to Clear Lake, Iowa, it was a special place for me. It was a lake. We'd go swim. We'd float on inner tubes that my grandfather took out of the big tractors from the fields. He would tape up the valves for him so he wouldn't get stabbed in the stomach by him, which happened many times. But it was just a really special time. One thing that my grandfather was great at was fishing. And I don't know, I've never seen it before, but he had taken a steel rod and taken an electrical cord and duct taped it to this rod. So every morning, it was maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning when it was dark, he always said, best time to go fishing. So we'd all wake up, he'd go out in the yard, and he would take this steel rod and he would stick it in the ground and he would plug it in, and we would just watch all the worms come out of the ground. And we'd collect all the worms and put them in the fridge, and then we'd take where we were going and we'd go fishing. And this lake in Iowa, Clear Lake, was known for bullhead. I don't know if anybody knows what a bullhead is, but it's like, for a little kid, it's like a monster. Like the little mutant like baby of a catfish. It's like the whole body got shoved up to in the front and it was all fat and then thin, but it had all these fins that were razor sharp, so if you didn't know how to grab it the right way, you were going to get cut and covered in fish gut and bloods. But it was neat for a kid coming from the city to be around people who weren't afraid of that, and they taught you how to deal with that and everything. So we would spend every morning at Clear Lake catching all this fish, and it was neat. My cousins would take them, they would lop the heads off. And one of the most memorable things for me of that, they would throw them in the garbage can. And those heads would sit there and flop around because of the nerves in the head hadn't died or something. So we would sit there, and my sister, and we were just amazed at 7, 8 years old that you could cut the head off something and throw it in and it would still be moving. I never got it till I grew up and understood a little bit about the human body and the nervous system and all that. But so we would do this every morning there, and it was sort of my first experience of farm to table, because we would do that and then we'd go on and play and go about our day playing in the lake in the summertime, and those fish would go to my grandmother. And we stayed at this little cabin on Clear Lake. It was called Hoss Pekinese. It was really strange to go to because we were going to Iowa, and this house was resembling a Chinese house in the countryside. It had all the Chinese peaked roofs. It was red and yellow, and you could see this from every area of Clear Lake. It was just this one house totally stood out. But this fish would disappear into my grandmother, and we'd go and play around all day, and we would come back in the house for dinner, and she had taken this thing that we had gone and got the worms out of the ground. We caught the fish out of the lake. My cousins had filleted it, chopped the heads off. We watched it flop around the garbage can, and we'd come in for dinner, and we had the most amazing fried fish that I've still never had anything like it in my life. And when we started getting ready to do this tonight, I never realized that I really had a farm-to-table food experience way back in my life that I had never thought about, because we've been when you're in the restaurant business, days really go by fast, and they go by fast. So it was really neat to come back and think about this, that this is something, you know, that my grandmother and my mom, they're all great cooks, and they've been passing this on. And that's my rambling story about fish. And Malaika sort of has a similar story with her grandma, and she's going to relate this all back to our restaurant and some events over the last couple of years. Thanks.
So, my story with my... Hello, testing on here. All right, so my story with my grandmother, a little bit different. My grandmother is from the South. She is like a tough, or was a tough old woman from Covington, Georgia. She was the daughter of sharecroppers, and she was just a no-nonsense kind of lady. And when you ate at her house, it wasn't like you were a kid at her house and you ate what was being cooked. When you came for dinner, she would have like black-eyed peas and collard greens and beets. My grandmother loved beets, and it would drive me crazy as a little kid because you're just like devastated that you're not eating McDonald's and all the other stuff that you felt like every other kid in the world is eating McDonald's and Chuck E. Cheese right now, and I'm stuck here eating black-eyed peas and collard greens and beets. And so my experience was a little bit different. And so when we were thinking on what we wanted to speak about, we weren't sure what we wanted to do, what we wanted to talk about, but we tossed around the ideas, and we realized that both of our grandmothers kept coming up in all the ideas. And so it was nice, and it was almost a little therapeutic to be able to sit down and think back on growing up and how they both really, for him and for me, how they shaped our lives and how they shaped how we think about food today. And so when I was younger, like I said, I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house, and she couldn't care less what she wanted to eat. And so when she cooked, you could either eat or you could opt out, but she was not making some special little children's meal for you. So those were your two options. And so let's see, my grandmother, not only was she generally, like, she didn't make anything that kids would like, but her refrigerator was like a science lab. Like, you would open it up and there would be stuff in there like cheese with mold on it, and she'd be like, well, that's what doctors make penicillin out of. Don't throw my cheese away, put it back in the fridge. I'm gonna cut that mold off and I'm gonna eat that cheese later. And then she would have milk in the refrigerator, and once the milk, like, food would metamorphose in her refrigerator from one thing to another, but you still couldn't throw it away. Milk, when it curdled, I don't know if there's anybody here, I'm sure there are lots of people here that are younger than like 30, milk used to actually curdle. It wouldn't just sit in the refrigerator and turn sour, it would get like chunks in it. And so when that milk curdled, it was now buttermilk. And so there was like a whole new product in the refrigerator now, and you better not throw it away. And I remember once, and this was like, you could not ever throw anything in my grandmother's refrigerator away. She like had it documented. She knew exactly what was in there. And I remember once, this had to be 30 years ago. She just passed away last year. And till last Christmas, she still, every single Christmas, mentioned the Christmas that I threw away her pot liquor from the collard greens that she made. And pot liquor is like oh, thank you, exactly. She told this story every year for 30 years. Every time she saw me starting to clean up the kitchen, she's like, ooh, I remember when Malaika went in that kitchen and threw away my pot liquor. Every year we've got to talk about this. And so my experience, like I said, was a little bit different because I kind of grew up feeling like, man, when I get out of here, I am going to go and I'm going to have all the money that I want to go to the grocery store and buy anything I want and cook anything I want, and I'm not going to have to eat, stuff like this anymore. And so it was almost like I grew up, and once I got a little bit older and I could appreciate it, I knew better. But when I was younger, it was almost like out of spite, I was going to go out and eat like McDonald's every day once I moved out of my grandmother's house. Excuse me. So we wanted to talk a little bit, again, like we said, about our grandmothers. And yes, one other thing about my grandmother. She was an absolute waste not, want not type of person. You did not, like I said, you didn't throw anything in her house away. Not only that, she ate every piece of every food that was on her plate all the time. She was eating the marrow out of bones before it was trendy and fashionable to do so. She sucked the marrow out of every chicken bone. She ate corn on the cob. She would eat the corn off of the cob and then eat the cob, the entire cob, chew it, and suck all the juice out of it. So, I learned about, tail or nose to tail dining, again, way before it was trendy. We never threw anything away. And that, as I grew up and I learned a little bit more about food and you see it, a little bit more about the world, I realized what a valuable, wonderful thing that was to learn from my grandmother. And it's so funny because now that I am an adult and I have a restaurant and I can go out and buy any of the food that I want, I eat all the time collard greens, black eyed peas, and I love beets. I love, love, love beets. And so, that's the story of our grandmothers. And it was really cool. We realized maybe a year ago, Adam's aunt sent us what is it? It's a 5-year anniversary, invitation to the 5-year anniversary of his great-grandparents' restaurant in Chicago. And we didn't even have any idea, nobody ever bothered to mention to us.
630 South Dearborn.
630 South Dearborn. So they own this restaurant. So we thought that was...
their 4th anniversary party at the restaurant.
And we got that around our 5th anniversary of our restaurant. And so that was really cool for us. And, what else do we want to talk about really quickly? We want to mention... Oh, yes! And so it was really cool that for us, both of our grandmothers got to actually come to our restaurant and sit down and enjoy it. And Adam's grandmother, actually, a lot of the cookies and stuff that we make are his grandmother's recipe. And we always served black eyed peas on New Year's Day because that was a huge tradition of my grandmother's. You had to eat black eyed peas on New Year's Day or you were going to die or something. I mean, seriously, you had to do it or something bad was going to happen. So I always have to do it. And we always do that at the restaurant. And we actually, Thanksgiving, which is one of the best holidays for both of our families, we were able to bring both of our families together. And we got married on Thanksgiving. We knew that both of our grandmothers were getting a little up there in age and they wanted us to be married. And we couldn't have cared less. We were engaged for 8 years. We dated for 10 years. We knew that this wedding was never coming, but we were just whatever, yeah, we're getting married, woohoo. And so finally, we were you know what, our grandmothers are getting a little older, let's do this. Let's go ahead and get married. Let's get everybody together. And so we had a surprise wedding on Thanksgiving Day and then this big, great feast afterwards. And it was so cool to be able to bring both of our families together for that. And then both of our grandmothers actually passed very shortly after. So this Christmas, both Adam and I cooked our Christmas dinner, and we got to do it at my grandmother's house, which was really cool. And all of his family came, and our family came, and so it's really cool to us to think about how food and family is something that we connect so much on, our love of food and our love of our families, and how that really keeps us, together and keeps us together. That's it.